My name is Carrie Souza, and this is my problem solution speech. This is my audience. Okay. Michael Badnarik said of prisons, on average, drug prisoners spend more time in federal prison than rapists, who often get out on early release because of the overcrowding in prison caused by the drug war. Prison overcrowding is dangerous for staff and inmates, costly, and in dire need of reform. Today I'm going to outline the problem concerning prison overcrowding, including its causes and effects. Then I will offer solutions at various levels to combat the problem. I will argue that prisons are operating above their capacity, that mandatory minimum sentences, the truth in sentencing requirement, and racial bias are the main reasons for overcrowding, and offer several solutions to remedy the situation. The growth in the prison population has led to prisons to operate far above their rated capacity at an average of 35 to 40% over. ALEC.org reports that when we include state prisons, local jails, juvenile facilities, and Indian County jails, there are more than 2.4 million people imprisoned, making the United States the nation with the highest prison population in the world. More people are being sentenced to prison and for longer terms. According to Urban.org, in 1986, 50% of convicted felons received a prison sentence, 37% received probation, and the remaining a fine. In 2011, more than 90% received a prison sentence and just 10% probation. The website sentencingproject.com says change in law and policy, not an uptick in crime rates have led to these numbers. Sentencingproject.org also says, since the war on drugs in the 80s, there are more people in jail today for drug offenses than the total number of people in jail for any crime in 1980. Mandatory minimum sentences and the truth in sentencing requirement and cutbacks in parole are major contributors to prison overcrowding. Mandatory minimum sentences keep nonviolent drug offenders in prison for long sentences. In addition, cutbacks in parole for offenders keeps people in jail longer. The National Research Council reports a 222% prison population growth is due to increased jail time for offenders, and that 1 in 9 prisoners are serving a life sentence, and half of those are serving life without parole. The truth in sentencing requirement at the federal level says that 87% of a sentence must be served, and at the state level, 50% must be served, with the average sentence being 52 months at the federal level. More prisoners are in jail for a longer time. Racial bias in arrests and sentencing of offenders contributes to prison overcrowding. 37% of the U.S. population is made of people of color, yet they make up 67% of the prison population. African Americans are more likely to be arrested and convicted, and much more likely to face stiffer prison sentences. Black men are 6 times as likely as white men to be incarcerated, and Hispanics are 2 times as likely as white men. Data from sentencingproject.org shows that of those born in the United States in 2011, the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of all men is 1 in 9. The likelihood of white men, 1 in 17, and Latino men, 1 in 6, but black men face a 1 in 3 chance of likelihood of being imprisoned. Now that I've shared some of the causes of prison overcrowding, I'll tell you some of its effects. The effects of prison overcrowding due to more and longer prison sentences, mandatory minimum sentences, and racial bias are many. Prison staffing hasn't kept up with the growth in inmates. In 2000, the inmate to staff ratio was 4 to 1, which was considered unsafe. The proposed budget cuts for the 2019 budget under the current administration includes cutting 2,500 correction officer jobs, and the ratio is expected to rise to 5 to 1, creating an even more unsafe environment. Information retrieved from Urban.org says that studies have shown an increase in serious assaults in staff at the 4 to 1 ratio. In addition to poor staffing ratios, the federal budget in 2014 was $6.9 billion, more than a quarter of the Department of Justice's entire budget. The budget for 2019 is $7.1 billion, and due to the current administration's push for maximum sentences on drug charges, this budget includes an estimated increase of 10,000 inmates. The dangers for inmates and staff cannot be understated. Overcrowding makes it harder for the basic needs of inmates to be met: healthcare, food, and accommodation. Education and rehabilitation programs have long waiting lists, and it also creates tension among prisoners in an already challenging environment. I've told you some of the reasons why prisons are overcrowded and some of the effects that overcrowding causes. Now I'll share some solutions at the state and federal level. There have been some changes at the state level to help lower the number of prisoners. California passed Prop 47 in 2014, in which some drug offenses are reclassified from a felony to a misdemeanor and put that money saved into prevention programs. New York reformed the Rockefeller drug laws in 2009 that imposed long mandatory minimum sentences for low-level drug offenders. More states should follow these same changes and should invest in interventions at high-risk communities to encourage youth development and respond to delinquent behavior with age-appropriate methods. At the federal level, the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 helped reduce the discrepancy between sentences passed between crack and powder cocaine offenders, which helps reduce racial bias in sentencing. There needs to be a bigger push for reforms at both the state and federal level, and most of these reforms can happen on both levels. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 should be applied retroactively to put cases with unfair sentencing, which has the potential to affect over 3,000 inmates and save $229 million over 10 years. Eliminating mandatory minimum sentences will reduce long sentences, allowing judges more discretion in sentencing using specific criteria for drug offenses, including history and violence, and approaching each case on a case-by-case basis. Lowering the truth in sentencing requirement from 87% at the federal level to 85%, 75%, or 70% based on the offense. This will reduce overcrowding and at the 75% requirement, save over $1 billion over 10 years. We should allow more inmates the chance to reduce their sentences by earning credit for good behavior and attending drug rehab and education programs. In conclusion, the prison overcrowding problem is a major one and needs to be addressed at both the state and federal level. Today, we have looked at some of the causes of prison overcrowding and its effects. There are many reasons for prison overcrowding: more and longer prison sentences, mandatory minimum sentences, and the truth in sentencing requirement, racial bias in arrests and convictions. These things create unsafe inmate to staff ratios, putting staff and inmates in danger, create a huge budget, leading cuts to staff to save money, creating an even more unsafe environment, and hindering the ability to provide accommodation, education, vocational, and drug rehab programs. When we look at reforms made in California and New York, we see positive change in the prison system can happen. It's important to look at the causes of prison overcrowding and how inmates and staff are negatively impacted and look for ways to change the situation. The solutions I shared, abolishing mandatory minimum sentencing, providing programs for at-risk youth in their communities, and provide ways for inmates to earn early release credits, education, and rehabilitation, are all reasonable and actionable ways to reverse the overcrowding in the United States prison system.